Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following.
UCP leadership hopeful Travis Taves stopped by Lethbridge on Tuesday and says he has a plan to bring more doctors to our city. We have mixed reaction from Alberta's Indigenous community on the apology from Pope Francis on the Catholic Church's role in residential schools. And a shooting in Langley, British Columbia leaves 3 people dead, including the gunman. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. UCP leadership hopeful Travis Taves was in Lethbridge on Tuesday chatting about his leadership platform. Taves held a meet and greet at the Nordbridge Senior Centre. Now, the issue of no doctors accepting new patients in Lethbridge has been a hot-button topic the past few years. The only clinic currently accepting new patients in Lethbridge is the Prairie Treatment Opioid Dependency Clinic. Taves says if he's elected Premier, he will make sure that there are more doctors coming to Alberta, and in particular, right here in Lethbridge.
We know in Lethbridge that there's an issue with physicians. Look, there's a number of things we need to do. Number one, we need to ensure that we have enough regional incentives, rural remote incentives, and that they're applied in the right regions so that we can attract and retain physicians. Out of Calgary and Edmonton, a lot of our physicians like to stay in our larger centers. And I would add Grand Prairie to that. We're also in a similar situation in Grand Prairie today. The other thing we need to do as well, when it comes to physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, we need to review the credentialing requirements, credentialing criterion of our credentialing bodies in healthcare, and ensure that we're pulling in as many foreign-trained healthcare professionals as possible, that there is a track to get them right up to speed so that they can deliver healthcare in this province.
MLA Taves will be headed to Medicine Hat next for a UCP leadership candidate debate, which will be held on Wednesday night, and Bridge City News will be there as well. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper has thrown his support behind CPC leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre. Political reporter Brian Lilly says the announcement did not sit well with Poilievre's biggest competitor, Jean Charest.
Maybe it's an attempt just to motivate or demotivate Jean Charest and his team. Charest and his team trying to put the best spin forward on this, and they're saying, look, we're still in the race, and this shows that the Poilievre camp must be panicking if they've got to pull out the Stephen Harper endorsement card. Not a few political observers wondered if that was part of it. So I'm not surprised. I'm just not sure how it plays out. This is such an opaque system of voting that you don't really know what's going on. Poilievre still expected to win. Does this help him win on the first ballot? Maybe it does. Maybe that's part of the strategy here.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Mr. Lilly. He'll have more on the Conservative leadership campaign coming up in the second half of our program. When it comes to Conservative candidates, provincially or federally, it appears as though the messages they're conveying may be resonating with more and more Canadians. That's according to Catherine Smith, a former board member with UCP. Smith says you don't have to look much further than how many memberships CPC candidate Pierre Poilievre's team has sold.
It's always very interesting to see when people come to buy a membership during leadership campaigns or whatever. It's actually quite hopeful many times. And if you consider what's happening with Pierre Poilievre, and the thousands of people who came out in Calgary and in Edmonton and bought memberships, you see then that there's a whole group of people, and when you look at the percentage of people who even vote, you see that there's a whole group of people who have felt disenfranchised for a very long time. And I think with the right leader as the UCP leader, we're going to see a big difference in how the party moves ahead.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Catherine Smith and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Last week, a Calgary pastor, his brother, and an Alberta restaurant owner made headlines when they won their appeals against Alberta Health Services. The three had been slapped with fines, jail time, and censorship orders for defying public health restrictions during the pandemic. The Alberta Court of Appeal, however, ruled that those sanctions were illegal. Now, many are wondering what will be the next steps for the Pulowski brothers. Their lawyer, Sarah Miller, says she's already working to remove the criminal charges laid against them now that the court has ruled in favor of their appeal.
Because of this matter, being in the courts, being successfully pursued at the Queen's Bench level. The Pawlowskis were subject to a probation. They've been charged since with breaches of probation for attending peaceful protests. And they've also been charged, or Artur Pawlowski has been charged with criminal contempt of that same order when he attended a baptism service in June 2021. So I'm currently trying to work with the Crown Prosecution Service to get them to understand the decision from the Court of Appeal that really takes all the wind out of their sails for those criminal charges. I've not yet heard from them that they're going to withdraw, but hopefully that will be soon. So that's our next step, is to get these other knock-on effects caused by Justice Germain's order and the probation that they were under for so long to be, and his finding of contempt, which was wrongful and not anchored in law, as the Court of Appeal has found, have all those knock-on effects get dealt with and taken away as well.
Calgary street preacher Artur Pawlowski, who spent 51 days in jail, says he will continue to stand up for rights and says he will also continue to fight against tyranny. Tamara Leach has been ordered released from jail in Ottawa. An Ontario Superior Court judge says he found errors in the decision to revoke the Freedom Convoy organizers' bail 2 weeks ago. Leach was arrested at the end of last month for an alleged breach of her bail conditions. It included not allowing her to have contact with a long list of fellow convoy organizers without her legal counsel present. Leach was photographed with one of the people on that list, Tom Marazzo, when she received the George Jonas Freedom Award in Toronto. Justice of the Peace Paul Harris ordered her jailed until her trial, since there was no evidence that her lawyers were present at the time. Superior Court Justice Andrew Goodman says Harris made several legal errors, including that her bail conditions did not stipulate that she had to be discussing her case. The issue of tent encampments has continued to be a major story here in our city. Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Higgin brought forward a resolution to City Council on Tuesday asking for up to $230,000 to help in administrative and policing funding shortfalls to assist with a compassionate cleanup of the tent sites. Higgin also wants an additional $470,000 for what he calls suitable solutions that go beyond tent encampment cleanups. The motion was voted in favor by Council 8-1, with only Belinda Croson opposing. Well, it was a great day for taking your dog for a walk along the Old Man River here in Lethbridge. Lots of sunshine and not too hot. Jeanette Roche is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the mercury will continue to climb as we make our way to the long weekend.
Yes, it's going to be an extremely hot, long weekend, Hal. And, as we get closer and closer to it, the days are going to get hotter and hotter. Now, today's high was 25, overnight low 13. Into tomorrow, though, we're looking at a high of 26 degrees with the humidex going to feel like 28. Well, as we get closer to that weekend, the days are going to get hotter, where the mercury is going to rise to almost 30 degrees. And actually, it's going to be in the mid-30s by the weekend. But I'll have all those details coming up for you later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Following a large mass at Commonwealth Stadium, Pope Francis made a visit to the Church of the Sacred Heart in Edmonton's inner city on Tuesday. The century-old church blends Catholic and Indigenous rituals. Bill Perdue of the Parish Council thanked the pontiff for hearing the voices of those who've experienced trauma under the residential school system.
Your presence today gives us the opportunity to confront, to understand, to release, and to transcend our trauma. At Sacred Heart, we recognize that our newly restored church will serve as a venue for healing and reconciliation between the Indigenous of this land and all those who choose to come here now and in the future.
Audrey Poitras, who is president of the Métis Nation of Alberta, says the Pope's apology was a long time coming. She and Elder Angie Crirar said the gesture made by the pontiff will help residential school survivors and their families continue to heal.
I believe a lot of people in our communities have waited a long time for this. And there's certainly probably many different feelings out there, because what I've learned during all my years as a president of the Métis Nation, everyone needs to have their own time to deal with situations like this. And I'm very, very pleased that there are people like Angie who see it as another step forward in order to make sure that our children, our grandchildren, our future generations will be able to live better, and be freer of what has gone on in the past.
Several members of the Blackfoot tribe from the Blood Reserve here in southern Alberta made the trek to Edmonton this week to hear the Pope's message in person. One of them is Stephanie Braverock, who has grandparents who were residential school survivors.
I think it's good that he's acknowledging and he's putting in that effort, to come over here to apologize, I guess, in person, and to make the effort to go to these certain communities. It can't be all of them, but he is putting in that effort. I know there is a lot of people that are against it and that are mad and upset, that he's here. It's like it brings up a lot of memories, like bad memories. The damage is already done. It's but I'm just trying to focus on the good, the positive. I hope that there's a lot of good that comes out of it. I just hope that he's gonna do something good for our people and to really stay true to what he's saying.
Braverock attended the Mass at Commonwealth Stadium on Tuesday before proceeding to Lac St. Anne, where she performed a ceremonial song for the Pope. What an amazing experience. Agriculture innovation hubs have been around for quite some time. In fact, they've been around 30 to 40 years. Now, the hubs are hosted by a group of farmers who are interested in creating an organization that can support the industry by means of research and education. The problem now, however, is that support from the province is dwindling.
It used to be a very well-supported industry, but of recent, there's been a lot of cuts. Governments have been pulling out of supporting primary production. They're now focused on, other things. But as we've learned through COVID and as we've learned through a changing economy, the food is very important. Cost of food is very important. And also it helps diversify our economy. I know agriculture is going to be here for a long, long time. And I want to make sure that we have the infrastructure and the needs to support our agriculture.
Cole says he hopes the provincial and federal governments will start to look at ways to better support our agriculture industry. The Pincher Creek Health Centre will be receiving some much-needed upgrades. A release from Alberta Health Services says the facility will receive $900,000 to upgrade the security system, irrigation work, and a chiller replacement. The chiller will ensure more comfortable temperatures for both patients and staff. Irrigation includes repairs and expansion of irrigation to the Pincher Creek Health Centre grounds. Health Minister Jason Copping says work has also begun on a new $3.1 million CT outpatient service, including space to add a new CT scanner at the Pincher Creek Health Centre. 3 people are dead, including a suspected gunman, following a series of shootings in Langley, British Columbia on Monday. Police say the shooting began around midnight, with 4 people being shot by a lone male gunman. Police found 2 men dead and another man and a woman were injured. The woman is in critical condition in hospital. The shooter has been identified as 28-year-old Jordan Daniel Goggin, who was wounded when police arrived and was subsequently shot dead by officers. Goggin was from nearby Surrey and was known to police. Shootings occurred in at least 5 different locations throughout Langley, including at a parking lot of a casino and at a bus stop. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Leckie denies there was any political pressure on her to ensure the force released information about the weapons used in the Nova Scotia mass shooting in 2020. The House of Commons Public Safety Committee has heard conflicting accounts about what happened in April of 28th of 2020 during a meeting between Leckie and RCMP officials.
I recall Canadians being quite upset about the communications by the Nova Scotia RCMP at the time and the lack of information that was provided. So was that conversation only about guns, or was it a broader conversation that you had?
No, it was about all the conversations were about several things. The number of deceased was always changing, where the deceased were located, the background of the perpetrator, the replica uniforms and the replica cars were also another. There were so many different points, and what was getting frustrating was that the media was reporting everything before we did. And so when we talk about the number of deceased, for example, I remember looking up on a screen and seeing 22 faces on a screen, and we were reporting different numbers. So we needed to get in front of it.
MPs on the Heritage Committee questioned officials from Sport Canada and Canada's sports minister on allegations of sexual assault against members of the 2018 World Junior Hockey Team. Officials say they hope Hockey Canada's leadership team will ask itself whether they are the right people to make cultural change.
What do you say as minister when Hockey Canada 2 years ago started an action plan that they never completed, and then all of a sudden we bring them to the Heritage Committee in June, and all of a sudden 30 days later we have an action plan? What do you say to that, to Hockey Canada finally waking up that the report and the action plan should have been done 2 years ago when they started it?
I would ask again if the people who are in power now, who were in power then, are the right people to implement those action plans and to ensure that everyone, implements the recommendations. I do have serious questions about that.
Former NHL player Sheldon Kennedy, who has been advocating for victims of sexual violence, spoke out regarding the 2018 sexual assault allegations that Hockey Canada is currently dealing with. Kennedy tweeted earlier today that given his 26 years of advocating for victims, he can no longer sit idle. He is calling for the resignation of Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith, his leadership team, and the board of directors to step down from their positions immediately. Enough is enough already. Kennedy revealed back in 1996 that he had been sexually abused by former WHL coach Graham James when he was a player back in the 1980s. His story prompted Hockey Canada to introduce new rules requiring coaches to undergo background checks and to establish a hotline where players could report sexual abuse. Well, it was another beautiful day in southwestern Alberta, lots of sunshine and warm temperatures across much of our region, but it will be getting even hotter as we make our way to the long weekend. Full weather details are coming up. Well, if you took your bike out for a ride today, or if you preferred skate or longboarding, it was a nice day for it here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Roche is in now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the warm temperature will soon become even hotter as the week progresses.
Yeah, they certainly will, Hal. As we look to tomorrow, Wednesday, we're looking at a high of 26 degrees. Gonna feel more like 28 with that humidex, though, and the UV index sitting at 8, which is very high. Overnight low still staying in the teens here, 13 degrees overnight low. Into Thursday, high of 29. That mercury climbs even higher for Friday and Saturday, sitting at 30 degrees. By Sunday, though, look at that. We're looking at almost the mid-30s there with a high of 34 degrees and then back to 31 on Monday. So should be a beautiful long weekend for our August long weekend coming up. So excited about that. 26 the average high for this time of year, 11 the average low, 36 was our high temperature on this day back in 1984. And in 1999, we had our lowest temperature, which was only 4 degrees. 5:54 is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 9:22 p.m. giving us just a little under 15 hours and 30 minutes. So we're sitting about 15 hours and 28 minutes, just a little under 15 and a half hours. So days getting a little shorter there. A heat wave expected this whole week in British Columbia. Victoria sitting at 30 degrees, 27 in Vancouver. Both of those cities much warmer inland, especially Vancouver, looking at more like 35 inland. 25 the high in Edmonton tomorrow and 27 the high for Calgary under beautiful sunny skies. The rest of the prairies, lovely sunshine as well. Saskatoon sitting at 24, 22 in Regina, and 18 degrees only in Winnipeg. But Winnipeg also seeing those chance of thunder showers there and build up humidity as well that could see that risk of lightning as well. Toronto sitting at 27 degrees, 28 in Ottawa under beautiful sunny skies, 28 also in Montreal. This whole area just beautiful. Not as much as the heat wave as they had earlier in the week, so that heat warning now out of effect for them. 28 the high in Fredericton, 27 in Halifax. So here we're seeing the East Coast getting that heat warning effect as well. 27 in Charlottetown and 21 in St. John's, Newfoundland with the chance of showers. They could see 2 to 4 millimeters there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Stats Canada says sales in the food service industry increased by 3% to $7.4 billion in May as most provinces lifted COVID-19 restrictions. The agency says that was the highest monthly gain since the start of the pandemic. Stats Canada says sales at drinking places rose 6.1%, while full-service restaurants recorded a 3.1% increase, and limited-service restaurants nudged up 1.9%. Unadjusted sales in May were up 62.2% compared with May of 2021 and 12.7% compared with May of 2019. Shopify stock plummeted after the company announced it is cutting 10% of its workforce. Share prices of the Ottawa e-commerce company were down around 14.5% after company officials announced the cuts. The layoffs include staff in recruiting, support, and sales. The chief executive says the cuts were necessary because people are reverting to pre-pandemic shopping habits following a surge in online buying during COVID-19 restrictions that boosted demand for Shopify software. European Union governments are nearing an agreement to ration natural gas this winter to protect against any further supply cuts by Russia. EU energy ministers deliberated on Tuesday over a draft European law that would require member states to cut demand for natural gas by 15% from August through March. This would entail voluntary steps to reduce gas consumption. If these measures yield insufficient savings, a trigger will impose mandatory moves across the 27-nation bloc. Russia's Gazprom says it will limit supplies to the EU through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to 10% of capacity. Coca-Cola says it posted higher than expected sales in the second quarter. Company officials said it was due to price increases and more demand from restaurant owners. The Atlanta-based company says revenue grew 12% in the April to June period to $11.3 billion US. That was well ahead of the $10.56 billion Wall Street was forecasting. Coke earned 70 cents per share in the quarter. That beat 67 cents that analysts were expecting. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 131 points in the day to finish at 18,972. The Dow was down 228 points to 31,761. The S&P 500 was down 45 points to 3921, and the Nasdaq was down 220 on the day to 11,562. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.26 to $95.44 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 15 cents to $8.88 US. Gold was down $2.30 to $17.31 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $18.63 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.43 per bushel, barley is at $8.49, canola is at $18.28, and corn is at $10.64 per bushel. Live cattle were down 88 cents to $136.88. Feeder cattle were down $1.88 to $177.43, and lean hogs were down 25 cents to $116.75. All are August contracts. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.62 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Indigenous leaders are expressing mixed reaction to Pope Francis's apology for the Catholic Church's role in residential schools. Métis National Council President Cassidy Caron says the gesture is a step forward on the path of truth, justice, and healing. But Murray Sinclair, the former chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, says the Pope's apology falls short. Sinclair says Francis placed blame on individual members of the Church instead of the Catholic Church itself. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have more on the papal visit in just a moment. Mr. Lilly will also discuss why many Canadian farmers are angry at the Trudeau government right now. And just a reminder, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come celebrate Heritage Day on Monday, August 1st at Fort Whoop-Up, beginning at 1 p.m. There'll be all sorts of family-friendly activities to enjoy with wagon rides, a petting zoo, exploring the fort's community garden, and learning about traditional food preservation methods. Admission is by donation. For details, visit fort.galtmuseum.com. Discover homegrown produce and homemade products at the Downtown Farmers Market at Festival Square in Lethbridge. Every Wednesday beginning at 9 a.m. until September 4th, you'll find over 15 local vendors selling fresh fruit and vegetables, delicious baked goods, homemade soaps, and so much more. Enjoy the relaxing atmosphere and support local producers and artisans at the same time. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
It was a very emotional apology, but also a full one. Pope Francis said he was sorry and asked for forgiveness in the Catholic Church's role in the residential school system. Now, to talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, while the Prime Minister and Governor General were there, we did not really hear from them. Was there a reason for that?
The reason was to put the focus on the apology. This was a long time coming. Although this trip, by the way, was put together rather quickly. It wasn't planned for earlier this year. And this is the type of trip that normally is planned out over years. And instead, it was put together in months. Pope Francis meeting with several survivors of residential schools back in April at the Vatican, where he gave them a private apology. You know, they all talked about it and described how heartfelt and full it was. But there were calls that he had to do a full public apology on Canadian soil. And so, yes, while this is a state visit, the Pope is the head of the Vatican, which is a nation state, smallest one on the planet, but it is one. The Prime Minister and the Governor General have just taken on roles of observers, of greeting him when he arrived at Edmonton International Airport, but not really, taking any of the spotlight away from where it should be. And that is on Pope Francis offering an apology in person to residential school survivors. I watched the entire thing. I was more emotional than I thought, watching him look out over the graveyard, which is, has been a community graveyard in Mascowis for a long time, but is also the resting place for some residential school students who didn't make it home. So he prayed over the graves. He met with survivors. He partook in ceremonies. They gave him, a war bonnet, a headdress. It was all very moving, very emotional, very filled with faith, saying that the church had lost its way. It did not live up to the gospel in the way that people were treated. It's been a long time since we've seen that much prayer on national secular news networks as we saw on Monday, but very moving, Hal.
Now, the Pope's trip continues this week, Brian, as he leaves Alberta for Quebec and Iqaluit. Will it be a similar theme, or will the tour become a little more political?
Well, it will still maintain a similar theme. The focus is on the Indigenous peoples of Canada. There is a bit of a meeting with secular political leaders when he's in Quebec City, but he is also participating in more ceremonies with Indigenous leaders in Quebec, and then, of course, in Iqaluit, where he'll meet with Inuit members and survivors of residential schools. So it will take on a little bit more of a political meeting. I think there might be a bit more of a photo op with the Prime Minister while he's in Quebec City. I'm sure that Premier Francois Legault, who's up for re-election, will try and make sure that he gets a photo with Pope Francis as well. But for the most part, this is very different than any other papal visit that we've had before. This is the fourth one, and they tend to be, you think of World Youth Day, thousands of youth coming around the world, and huge rallies and masses and expressions of faith. This is a very different one, very somber, which I think is appropriate given the subject.
Brian, farmers across Canada, especially here on the prairies in the West, are really concerned about a push to reduce fertilizer emissions from the Trudeau government. Walk us through this. Now, the government says it's voluntary and it's not about reducing fertilizer, but our farmers say otherwise, and they're really upset. What's the truth here?
Well, the truth is that right now it is voluntary, but farmers rightly believe that they will make it mandatory. This is something the Trudeau government has been talking about for a while. They want an absolute 30% emissions reduction from fertilizer. So right now they're saying it's voluntary. If they can't get agreements in consultations that are ongoing right now, at some point, it will become a mandatory program. Now, the government says this isn't about cutting fertilizer use, but the farmers I'm talking to, both here in Ontario, where they're very concerned about it as well, but across the prairies, the farmers I'm talking to, the industry groups say you can't cut emissions by 30% without cutting fertilizer at this point. There is, there is a different type of fertilizer. It's not up to scale yet, that doesn't have the emissions of nitrous oxide, which is what the government's concerned about. They say there's a greenhouse gas that has to be controlled, but that leaves plastic, microplastics in the soil. So, it's a bit of back and forth, but the farmers are effectively right. They are being told to cut emissions by 30%, which means a reduction in fertilizer by 30%, which means lower yields. And they say, anybody you talk to, including my colleague Anthony Furey, spoke to someone who was in the Ontario Liberal government working for the agriculture minister. And so they're a Liberal, and they're saying, look, we already have the cleanest, most sustainable growing methods and use of fertilizer methods in the world. we can't do this without reducing things. They're already following best practices. Can you improve them? Always. But that's what farmers are trying to do. But the government is pushing something that farmers say simply won't work.
Last week, Federal Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau met in Saskatoon with her provincial colleagues, Brian, many of whom left feeling quite angry over this very issue. What transpired?
Well, I think they were looking for a bit of flexibility when Minister Bibeau went to Saskatoon. And instead, they got no flexibility. Statements issued by Alberta's agriculture minister, Nate Horner, Saskatchewan's David Merritt, they actually put out a joint news release saying that these targets are wrong, that they're arbitrary goals. Lisa Thompson, the agriculture minister for here in Ontario, also putting out a statement saying that this is the wrong way to go, that she was disappointed that there wasn't any flexibility. There didn't seem to be any room for maneuvering, that the federal government, as I said, they're claiming it's voluntary. They're claiming they're having consultations, but the ministers are not seeing it that way. And by the way, those three agriculture ministers that I just mentioned, Horner, Merritt, and Thompson, they were all successful farmers or ranchers before going into politics. Right. Still have the operations for at least two of them, I believe. Marie-Claude Bibeau was a bureaucrat. She was an international development bureaucrat before this. So, who do you want to believe? Somebody who knows how to work the soil, or somebody who doesn't know what crop she's driving by as she goes to her home in the eastern townships of Quebec?
Or somebody who actually knows how to drive a combine, right, or a tractor.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, speaking of which, a number of farmers here on the prairies have been supporting their brethren in places like the Netherlands, where their governments are also calling for reduction in fertilizer. Now, it's not just in the Netherlands, but apparently farmers are also protesting in Sri Lanka. So it's not just in Canada, but around the world.
This is kind of part of the global movement for meeting Paris climate targets, and different governments have taken different approaches, but they want to see fertilizer use reduced. As I said, we already have the cleanest measures, the cleanest ways of doing it, the most responsible and sustainable ways of doing it in this country. Sri Lanka went to an absolute extreme, and they banned the use of synthetic fertilizers. That saw a 20% reduction in their rice crop. They had a reduction in tea production, which is a major source of income for that island nation. So there were real problems there. In the Netherlands, what we've seen with Dutch farmers is they've been mandated, it's not voluntary, mandated a 50% reduction. Wow. So, what we saw in Sri Lanka with the overthrow of the government was partially related to the fertilizer issue, an awful lot of other economic issues plaguing that country as well. But in the Netherlands, what we're seeing is directly the same policy idea. They've taken it a step further, 50% instead of 30, mandatory instead of voluntary for now. And Dutch farmers are saying that, this is one of the country's main economic drivers, and the government is on a collision course to try and derail it. So they're pushing back. I think we will start seeing more protests, not to the point that we saw in Sri Lanka, but we will see more protests across the country as more people learn about this and decide that they've got to fight back, because the Trudeau government isn't listening, despite saying they're in consultation.
Brian, the Commons Public Safety Committee heard from Bill Blair and RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki after allegations of political interference in the investigation of the Nova Scotia mass shooting back in April of 2020. They also heard from those who were working in the investigation who had a very different story. Who should we believe?
I say we believe the people that came up from Nova Scotia. If you remember, this came about because of handwritten notes taken by the man who was the face, the public face of the investigation back in April 2020, a guy named Superintendent Darren Campbell. And he took notes after a rather abruptly called and tense conference call with RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki, where she expressed how disappointed she was that at that point in April of 2020, that the Nova Scotia team had not released the types of guns, the caliber of guns used in the mass shooting. And she told them that she had promised the public safety minister, Bill Blair, that this would be released and that it was all related to pending gun control legislation. Of course, just days later on May 1st, 2020, we saw the government establish their list and institute an immediate ban on using 1,500 different types of rifles and shotguns in Canada. So, was there political interference? Bill Blair wants to tell you no. Bill Blair says he never asked anybody to do this. Brenda Lucki is kind of in the middle. She says that, yeah, she did tell them that it would be there. She doesn't remember using the word promise, but every single other person on that call in Nova Scotia heard her say it was a promise, heard her say that she was being pressured by the minister's office and the PMO, heard her say that this was related to gun control legislation. So you've got a whole room full of people, and the only ones that are saying this didn't happen or they can't recall are people in Ottawa, very political people. I'm not buying the Liberal spin on this. I'm not buying Brenda Lucki's spin. She's a politician, just like Bill Blair, who I covered when he was Toronto police chief, and who's got a record that I don't think he should be as proud of as he is. He was throwing that around a lot yesterday. I don't believe him as a minister or as a former police officer.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper has made it official. He's thrown his support behind Pierre Poilievre to become the next leader of the federal Conservatives. Now, Brian, were you surprised by this? And how much will it really help Poilievre?
That second part's an open question, but was I surprised? I'm not surprised that Stephen Harper is backing Pierre Poilievre. I think everybody knew that. I laughed a little bit in Harper's video that he posted online, making the endorsement official, where he said, people have been wondering. No, nobody was wondering. Everyone knew. Look, I'd been told back in June, watch out for Stampede. When Stampede comes along, you might see Stephen Harper put his arm around Pierre Poilievre and endorse him. It might happen in person. This is something to keep an eye out for. Then about a week or so before Stampede, I was told, no, that's not going to happen. He's going to stay out of it at this point. He's not going to make any announcements. So, people that are following this knew where Stephen Harper stood. He was backing Pierre Poilievre. He does not like Jean Charest. But it's odd that it came out now. I'm not sure that Poilievre needs it now. Maybe it's an attempt to speak to the existing 140,000 members that were there before all the sign up, try and get the mainstream establishment members of the party to back Pierre because some of them were not. Maybe it's an attempt just to motivate or demotivate Jean Charest and his team. Charest and his team trying to put the best spin forward on this, and they're saying, look, we're still in the race, and this shows that the Poilievre camp must be panicking if they've got to pull out the Stephen Harper endorsement card. Not a few political observers wondered if that was part of it. So I'm not surprised. I'm just not sure how it plays out. This is such an opaque system of voting that you don't really know what's going on. Poilievre's still expected to win. Does this help him win on the first ballot? Maybe it does. Maybe that's part of the strategy here.
Brian, inflation continues to spiral out of control. We're now over 8%. Do the Trudeau Liberals actually have a plan to help make life a little more affordable for Canadian families?
A poll out by the Meru Group researchers last week said that majority of Canadians don't think that the Prime Minister has a plan. Never mind a good plan or a bad plan, they just don't think he has a plan at all. And having watched him and listened to him, I have to agree. I mean, he keeps coming back to the issue of we're lowering your childcare fees. He's been saying that since inflation really became a big issue last August for this government. Look, if you've got kids in daycare, yeah, that program's going to help and you're going to see your fees reduced. Maybe you've gotten a rebate check depending on where you live in the country and how your local government is implementing this. But if you've got older kids who aren't in daycare anymore, maybe they're 10, not fully grown like yours or mine, but your kids are 10, they're not going to daycare. That's not helping you. You're a senior. That's not helping you. You're single. You don't have kids. That's not helping you. It doesn't reduce the cost of gas. It doesn't reduce the cost of housing. It doesn't reduce the cost of groceries, which we all know have gone up tremendously. So no, the Prime Minister just simply doesn't have a plan to deal with this. He thinks that it's all on the Bank of Canada. We've had RBC, BMO, Scotiabank, academic economists like Ian Lee all step forward and say, look, the government's spending is contributing to inflation. The last thing Justin Trudeau wants to do is reduce spending. In fact, David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, said the government's having a windfall right now due to inflation. Gas taxes are up, GST revenue is up, so they're doing really well. He called on them. He said, "Don't spend the surplus that you're pulling in right now, because that will generate more inflation. It'll be awful for the economy." So everybody but the Trudeau Liberals say they've got a role to play, that they should be doing something. They don't seem to believe that at all.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
The strength of a community is found in the strength of its members. As our cities and communities grow, politics and leaders move and grow along with the members. One such influential member of Southern Alberta has been Catherine Smith of Medicine Hat, who is a former member of the United Conservative Party. Catherine, thanks so much for joining me today from your home away from home there in Scottsdale.
Thanks, Jeanette. Happy to be meeting with you.
Awesome. Okay, so Kathy, you worked extensively with the United Conservative Party in the past. So when you look at the party right now, is this where you thought the party would be?
No. In fact, having discussions with many members, we all feel the same way, that we envisioned something quite different. We envisioned almost what Danielle Smith is saying now about having a Sovereignty Act, looking after our own affairs, which we're entitled to do according to the Constitution. Provinces do have those rights. And so to see where we are now with this constant barrage from Ottawa about everything, it's really, really disappointing. But there's always hope, and there's some great people in Alberta. Actually, Alberta is such a wonderful province. The people there are so wonderful, and I have great hope for the future.
Mm-hmm. So where do you think things went wrong with the party?
Well, I guess I've been involved from the beginning, since before the party actually got established. I sold memberships for Jason Kenney in my home at the kitchen table when people were sitting in my living room and in the dining room waiting their turn to buy a membership. So that's how involved I was. And I really thought that Jason meant what he said. And as it turned out later, I really feel that he didn't listen at all to the people. He didn't listen to the board, many of us who were board members. I was the Southern Regional Director. So that included Medicine Hat all the way to Banff and up to Three Hills and Olds. So that was quite a bit of driving for a volunteer to attend the meetings and to bring back information that was not actually really considered or felt like it was like on deaf ears when information was brought back about how the members were feeling. And as we moved along through all of this harsh COVID restrictions and everything, it just became more apparent that the listening was happening inside the Premier's office with the boys from Ottawa, and not from the Albertans, everyday Albertans on the street who were trying to make a living, trying not to let their businesses go under during all of this. And of course, the trauma on the children in schools having to wear masks, telling them that they were going to kill grandma, that there were going to be body bags in McMahon Stadium. All of that was just too much of a buildup for people to take. They wanted something done. And so the leadership was called, but not without a lot of grief to the constituency associations also, completely ignoring their request to have the leadership review. But finally it was held, and the Premier was very shocked to find out that what he was being told inside his office was not really what was going on in Alberta. So that's, that's kind of why I just felt like I just could not stay on the board and condone what was happening to people that I consider my relatives. I feel very close to the people of Alberta. I'm a true Albertan, even though I was born in Ottawa and lived for 23 years in Ottawa. But I really am a true Albertan, and that's where my heart is. And I still have a flag here. My Alberta flag is on my desk.
Wow.
So yeah, it's yeah.
Well, thanks so much for going into your history there a little bit. That's really, we appreciate that. So you mentioned the leadership of the UCP. So let's tackle that. So when you look at the options who hope to be on the ballot, what's your first impression of these people?
Well, I think that in some cases, and I'm going to be very frank about this because I've been involved in politics for a very long time, for at least 50 years. And so when I see the candidates, particularly the ones who were in cabinet, I think it's a posturing. It's to make sure that they're able to run as a candidate in the next election. That's more what they're trying to do, to set themselves up in front of people so that people have an idea of who they are, and particularly the constituents who are going to choose them as the UCP candidate, because I believe they're all still going to face nominations. But that may change too. I don't know. It's, the rules change by the day with the party, so who knows? But I feel that that's a big part of it. In the case of Brian Jean, well, he has an axe to grind. He was second behind Jason Kenney in the first leadership. And so I think that he's there to continue what he had started originally, when he had a different idea about probably what the UCP would be when it amalgamated with the Wild Rose. And so, and in the case of Travis Taves, I think his heart is probably in the right place. I don't think he has enough experience. I mean, he is an Albertan and he has all the right credentials. But I think that, when you are involved with an organization for a few years and there's a certain style of leadership and you've not known other styles of leadership, it becomes very detrimental to your thinking. And I think that's where Travis Taves. But I think he's a good man. I've met him once. And I thought he was he's a man of integrity. He cares about his own family, but we need someone strong. And when I saw his interview the other night, he was not willing to say that he would actually stand up for Alberta. And I mean stand up as in the way that Danielle Smith is speaking about standing up. We've got to stop this, oh, we'll just be nice and have hugs with Justin Trudeau. Those days are long gone. And we need someone who's going to be very strong and who's going to bring Alberta back to the way they were, a prosperous province with hard-working people, if we haven't beaten every bit of hope out of them by now. But I know the rural areas are always tough. And that's my hope. That's what I represented, were the rural areas. And those people are strong. They're strong people, and they're our hope for the future.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you, what does the next leader of the UCP need to do, not only to win the next election, but also to lead Alberta? And I think you...
Well, I think that, also when I was looking at the interview the other night, I felt that most of them outside of Danielle Smith actually, and oh, by the way, I'm not related to her at all. So don't anybody think that. In fact, I think I've met her once or twice. But I just feel like she's actually got a vision for the province. And I think a lot of that is because she had that radio show where she really learned a lot about the province from the people she interviewed. And in many different sectors, in the agricultural area, in the technical area, in all of the areas where we need, labor is a big problem. And I see nothing coming out of the government right now. Every day they're making announcements about money being thrown here and there and everywhere. And I see nothing about labor, as in construction workers, as in plumbers. We had this problem when I was on council in 2001 in Medicine Hat. We were talking then with the college about how we needed to be training younger people to take over the trades. And that's when we started the whole program in high schools. And I don't know where that is now, but obviously it's not doing much when there are so many jobs that are not being filled in Alberta. And yet all we hear about is tech, and nothing about physical labor that needs to be done. So, our immigration, and that's been spoken about too. We need to make sure that the people who are coming here actually have skills that we can use.
Now, Kathy, what's your take on those looking to see Alberta separate from the rest of Canada?
Actually, I am very much in favor of what Dr. Dennis Modry and Jeff Rath are saying with the Alberta Prosperity Project. They're talking about, for 116 years, we have gotten nothing from Ottawa, nothing. We are no different now than we were 116 years ago as far as getting any respect from Ottawa. And in fact, they've turned it into the eastern provinces actually despise us. And this is unnatural. And this is all coming out of Ottawa. This is coming out of the mainstream media who've been bought off by Trudeau. And so there's this false assumption. Last summer I was at the Strathmore rodeo, and I met some people there. I could hear people speaking French, so I went over and talked to them. And I said, where are you from? And they said, we're from Quebec and different areas. And I said, well, how do you like it here? And they said, we love it here. We want to move here. You see, they had no sense of what we were really about. And when they met the people, they said, wow. I mean, in fact, as much as people think Quebec is so different from Alberta, the people are not different. They're very joie de vivre, not as hardworking as Albertans, certainly not. And I can say that because I'm from there. But they do appreciate other human beings. Yeah. And you saw that in Ottawa during the convoy. The two biggest groups there were the Quebecers and Albertans.
That's a very good point, Kathy.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. When it comes to this next election, some polls are showing that Rachel Notley's NDP could possibly form the next government, right? So how realistic do you think that is?
Well, anything's possible. We never thought she'd win the first time. In fact, when people were emailing me and saying, so-and-so is going to win, I said, no, they're not. That can't happen. And it did. So anything is possible. That's why the next leader of the UCP, who, by the way, will be the premier for, some months, has got to be very strong and show that they're sticking up for Alberta. And while we believe that, Rachel Notley does definitely have a following, a lot of her members are from a certain class of people. And we have a different supporters with the United Conservative Party, and not necessarily even ones that you would suspect were our supporters. It's always very interesting to see when people come to buy a membership during leadership campaigns or whatever. It's actually quite hopeful many times. And if you consider what's happening with Pierre Poilievre and the thousands of people who came out in Calgary and in Edmonton and bought memberships, you see then that there's a whole group of people. And when you look at the percentage of people who even vote, you see that there's a whole group of people who have felt disenfranchised for a very long time. And I think with the right leader as the UCP leader, we're going to see a big difference in how the the party moves ahead.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kathy, we're almost out of time, but what would you say to Albertans who are watching this interview who may be just fed up with what they see as the whole political process?
Well, don't get fed up. That's when the other side wins. That's when everything you don't want to happen will happen if you quit. There's no such thing as quitting now. As John Harper says many times, winners never quit and quitters never win. So I would give that message to everyone. Get involved at any level. Get involved at the municipal level. Get on a committee of city council, or get involved in one of the leadership campaigns, and help the person that you think is going to represent you against the NDP in the next election, and for the future of Alberta more than anything.
Thanks so much, Kathy. That is all the time we have for today, but we appreciate you joining us. Thanks very much, Jeanette. Best wishes. Thank you. That was Catherine Smith, former board member of the United Conservative Party out of Medicine Hat in Calgary, and joining us today from her home in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.